you so much, Elizabeth. Say, very, very interesting indeed. Say, um, looks like I'm off to Gothenburg. I'd love to. I think it's quite inspiring. So, was it Jane, the lady who was out of prison on your presentation? Marianne, sorry, I beg your pardon. Where did Jane come from? So, I think that's very inspiring. Like you say, you come from, well, let's say her life changed, and then I think that's just epitome of how hospitality, if I can say, it can be a success no matter what your backgrounds, no matter
Yes.
what your history.
And one major point maybe is that we used to say that if you have been excluded and you work in the tourism sector, you know how it feels to be excluded. So you're more than welcoming. And that's a good way of treating your guests.
Lovely, thank you so much indeed. So, what a lovely presentation, right here. So, right, we'll move on to the second presentation of this morning, and then after this we have a coffee break. I'd like to welcome a gentleman from England, from London, I believe, who he's currently heading up the regional office. He's the regional official for the United Union Trade Association, covering the hospitality sector in London. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dave Turnbull.
You okay? Good morning. I've spent all of my life in the hospitality sector. I started work at 16 as an apprentice chef, and I've spent all of that time organising my colleagues into trade unions. I think I was first approached when I was 16 about joining a union, and I've been a union member ever since. Spent a lot of my time in locker rooms and service lifts talking to people about getting organised and having a collective response to the conditions they face in hotels. And I'm now a regional officer with Unite the Union, but I haven't escaped the hotel industry because my job is organising workers in hotels and restaurants. So I'm going to talk about outsourcing in hotel housekeeping in the UK and how the conditions that prevail within that sector are actually, to my mind, on the edge of modern slavery, because a lot of the conditions that prevail send out the warning signals that you would be expected to look for in terms of people trafficking and such like. And it's a model that has grown in the UK. And really, to my mind, the starting point was the very first Gulf War back in 1992-93, when tourists just stopped coming to London altogether, and the hotels had to lay off loads of people. When it picked up again, we found most hotels were doing a 50-50 ratio, 50% permanent workers, 50% agency. And it's just progressed since then, and we now have the majority of hotels in London and the rest of the UK have outsourced their housekeeping entirely. The only person employed by the hotel is likely to be the executive housekeeper. So we have subcontracting, and a lot of the big hotel chains will tell you that they do an ethical audit before they award the contract to a contractor. As far as we can see, that is a tick box exercise. So they don't dig deep. So we know for a fact that there are at least 4 agencies who win contracts with global hotel chains, and they have an illegal clause in their contract of employment, which says if you leave within 3 weeks of us employing with you, we will withhold your first week's pay because that's the week we trained you. That's written into their contract, yet they get past the ethical audits. So they're of no value at all unless the people who are doing those audits know how to dig deeper. The role model that's been adopted is that the contracts are based on invoice by room, not on the number of people you employ, not on the number of hours they work. The agency is expected to invoice the hotel on a daily or weekly basis. We've cleaned 400 rooms today, and they get a payment per room, which works out around about 50% of the minimum wage rate. So that used to be linked to the minimum wage, because the minimum wage said it was lawful in hotels for hotels to use a piece rate mechanism where you could be paid by the room. But we campaigned against that, and it's now no longer lawful for hotels to do that. But they haven't changed the invoice by room business model. So despite the fact that's unlawful, they still do it. The subcontracting, usually the contract is issued for a year or 2 years. And quite often the contractor changes regularly. It's a requirement of law under UK legislation and under most European countries that when there is a transfer of undertakings, there is a collective consultation with the workforce. That is by and large ignored because the workers are mainly migrants. They don't understand their rights. And what generally happens is they're called to a meeting like this. They're told, we're the outgoing contractor, goodbye. And then somebody else comes in and says, we're the incoming contractor, but don't worry, everything's going to remain the same. And that's the extent of the consultation. Comes to 2 weeks after the new contractor comes up, and everything is different. And there's been no engagement at all with the workforce. And then we have a complete denial of responsibility by the hotel chains. So there's been numerous exposés in the press about the way workers are treated in housekeeping. The most recent one was Premier Inn, which is a very popular budget hotel brand. And there was an undercover exposé of the conditions in the housekeeping department in a Premier Inn hotel, with very extensive breaches of minimum wage, exploitation of Romanian migrant workers, but it was a subcontractor. And that gave Premier Inn the route out to say, well, we didn't know this was going on. It's an isolated incident, nothing to do with us. We're innocent, Your Honour. So the service providers predominantly work on the basis of 0 hours contracts. Yeah, so you get a job with a service provider, but you've got no guaranteed hours at all. We've had instances of room attendants who are on minimum wage, who find it extremely expensive to travel to work, being on the bus to work, being halfway to the hotel, and receiving a text message saying, don't bother coming in, we're not going to give you any work today. So it's a completely exploitative business model. Excessive productivity targets are linked to the invoice by room. So the business model is 2 rooms an hour is manageable. But if you're invoicing by room, if you can force or compel your workers to do 3 rooms or even 4 rooms, you're getting double the profit as the contractor. And there's no control over those productivity targets. So what happens is people have accidents, they get burned out, they get injured, but it doesn't stop. It also results in minimum wage breaches. So what a room attendant will be told is your allocation of rooms for today is 23 rooms, and you've got to do those rooms before you go home. Yeah? If you don't do them, you're going to be disciplined. But you're only going to be paid for 8 hours, or 7.5 if they take away the lunch break. So what happens is because they can't manage to do 23 rooms in the time they're allocated, they stay 1 hour, 2 hours beyond their finish time in order to do that, and they don't get paid. So 1 or 2 hours free work for the contractor, The contractor still gets their clawback because they invoice for the number of rooms the room attendant did. There's also rest period breaches. So in order to do what you need to do, you cut your break short or you work through your break. So people are working flat out 9 or 10 hours and not being paid properly at all for it. And we had one contractor who admitted to us that that is their business model. And they said, the reason we do it is we know we will only get caught out 1 in 10 times. And when we get caught out, we just pay it. No problem, because we've got away with the other 9. So it's very, very conscious. It's not accidental. So the consequence of this business model is we have diminished diversity in housekeeping in hotels. So if you go into any hotel in London, you will see every nationality under the sun. Afro-Caribbean, Latin American, Filipino, Arabic, European, any kind of nationality you can imagine. If you go into a hotel where the housekeeping remains in-house, you will see that diversity reflected. If you go into a hotel where it is subcontracted, you will see 100% migrant workers, and very often 100% from the same group of workers. So there's a lot of hotels now in London at the moment, and this changes depending on where people come from, where every single room attendant is Romanian. The housekeepers and supervisors are Romanian. The Romanians do not speak any English at all other than hello, goodbye, thank you. And they are reliant on the supervisors. And the supervisors exert power over them. They bully them into increasing their productivity, or they work on grace and favor. Yeah? If you're good and do right, we'll let you go early. Yeah? If you're not, you're going to stay late. Very dubious recruitment practices. So the UK Equality and Human Rights Commission says that if you have a policy which relies on word of mouth and doesn't advertise properly and only recruits within one community, then you're at risk of putting yourself where people trafficking is possible. Most of these agencies operate on that basis. Some of them recruit directly from Romania, Hungary, those kind of countries, and bring people directly over. So they do all their interviews in those countries and bring people into the UK. Most of them have an introduction reward. So if you introduce people into the hotel and they stay for 3 months, you'll get 25 or 50 pounds. So that results quite often in the supervisors acting exactly like gangmasters in the agricultural industry. So they're identifying people in their own towns or villages back home, encouraging them to come over. What we found in a lot of cases is that the supervisors, housekeepers, people like that, also own the accommodation that these people are living in. So they might buy up a house, convert it into several rooms, put loads of bunk beds into the rooms. So they've then got total control over these people. Yeah, they've recruited them. They're in charge of them in the workplace. They're providing their accommodation. Yeah, quite often they're providing the transport to the hotel as well. So it becomes an impossible situation for those people to defend their rights, to assert their employment rights and protect themselves in the workplace, because they're totally reliant on these people who speak their own language but maybe speak better English than them, and who are being used by the contractor in a completely exploitative manner. And we've seen cases of complete humiliation and belittling of people. The common practice that we find is that if you're going to be picked on, you will be cornered in a room by 2 people. They will shut the door and lock it, and they will shout at you until you break down. And that happens on a regular basis, because when people have the courage to come and tell us, this is what they tell us. This is the tactic. So you've got no witnesses. You've got nobody to back up your version of events. If you try to report it, you've got two people saying, well, it didn't happen. We just had a conversation. She wasn't working properly to the standards of the hotel, so we just tried to explain to her what she was doing wrong. But actually, it's very, very intimidating. It's on the verge of imprisonment. You're locked inside a room with two people. So we did a survey of the consequences of this sort of intense productivity requirements. And it was around about 100 room attendants replied to this. 90% had pain or discomfort caused or made worse by work. 70% take pain medication. Interesting thing about this is that a lot of the over-the-counter pain medication in the UK is far weaker than you can buy in some of the countries in Poland, Romania, places like that. So when they go home, they bring back huge supplies of very, very powerful pain medication. But at the start of their shift or at their lunchtime, they take the pain medication and they wash it down with energy drinks, Red Bull or that kind of thing. So what they're doing is running through their shift because it causes them so much physical pain on painkillers and energy drinks to get them to the end of the day. In the 21st century, in one of the world's top tourist destinations, that is an outrage that's happening. Yet it's happening in Hilton, Intercontinental Hotels, Marriott Hotels, any of the big hotel chains you can think of. This sort of thing is going on behind the scenes. 82% know colleagues who suffer the same pain and discomfort. 88% have neck pain, and 84% have lower back pain. And what you find is there's a huge turnover. So people burn themselves out for 6 months and then give up. Yeah. There's also a lot of movement between the hotels. So if one agency offers 2 pence an hour more than another, people will go and work there just for that little bit extra money. So what are we doing to try and get over this? So we had a Polish worker who was an extremely good artist, and she came to us with 4 pages of her own experiences done as a graphic novel. Yeah. And we said, well, actually, this is really good. So we've now got an entire book based on a group of migrant workers go for a job in a hotel. They think they're going to be employed by the hotel. They find out they're employed by an agency. And then it takes you through a proper narrative of their story, the kind of conditions they experience, how they find their way to the union, and how they begin to start organizing. And we're finding that very useful because there's bits in the story that are about health and safety. There's bits in it that are about minimum wage. There's bits in it that are about bullying. So we can have a group of workers together and ask them to look at the specific pages and share their experiences, and then we talk about the solutions. So it's really proving to be a good tool. We're trying to access via the community rather than the workplace. So we've got good links with migrant organizations and community groups. And in fact, the labor attaches in the embassies, the Romanian embassy, the Bulgarian embassy, have been really supportive of this, about trying to get the message across to their citizens who are being exploited in this manner. I've spelt that wrong. It's not UMWEP, it's UMWEP. The piece, there's an extra P in there. So it stands for United Migrant Workers Education Program. So Unite has established an education program for migrant workers where every Saturday morning, hundreds of migrant workers from the cleaning industry and the hotel industry come to the union office for English lessons, maths lessons, computer lessons, and lessons about their rights. Engaging the enemy. So we're taking our message directly to hotel groups and saying, look, you've got to stop this. You've got to look at another business model. And actually, one of the service providers has kind of had a road to Damascus moment and now has an agreement with Unite. And we've got training programs going on. We've got health and welfare initiatives going on with them. We've got equality stuff going on with them. And they're trying to present themselves now as the ethical alternative to this business model, to the extent that they've actually walked away from some contracts when they've tried to push them down so low. We've established through the Health and Safety Executive in the UK a safety standards working group, and we've actually got 2 major hotel chains, Park Plaza Hotels, which I believe has got some operations in Holland, and Melia Hotels, which is a Spanish hotel chain. Noticeable, neither of them are UK-based hotel chains, but they're working together with ourselves, the service provider WGC, which is the one we've drawn up the agreement with, and the UK Housekeepers Association, to draw up guidance and best practice on health and safety standards for hotel housekeeping. And in each of the guidance notes that we're going to do, there is going to be the priority of making people who've got English as a second language understand what the health and safety guidance is, either through English as a second language or translation of risk assessments and guidelines. We're getting workers to give testimony on their experiences. The Low Pay Commission in the UK, which helps to set the minimum wage, does a roadshow every year where it goes around the country and invites workers in. So we've organised on several occasions now for room attendants to come in and speak to the Low Pay Commission. We've also got a new body in the UK which grew out of the agricultural industry, the Gangmaster and Labour Exploitation Authority, and their job is to tackle this kind of exploitation. We've had a dialogue with them, and they've said the business model in hotels is very similar to that which was being used in the agriculture industry. They understand it, they recognise the issues. So again, we're getting room attendants to give evidence to them. And also the Permanent People's Tribunal, which is conducting an investigation into the exploitation of migrants and refugees in Europe. We're again preparing testimony from room attendants in terms of that. So we're not, if you like, just sitting back and saying how bad this is. We're trying to find imaginative solutions and ways of tackling it. And finally, we're engaged with other trade unions on a global basis because this is not unique to the UK. These are global hotel chains who are operating business models like this where they can get away with it in other countries. Some places it's more extensive, some places it's less, some places it's a bit more subtle, some places it's quite open. So the International Union of Food Workers is the international trade union which Unite and other unions organising hotel workers are affiliated to. And they have a global hotel workers housekeeping campaign. And if you go on the IUF website, you can find on there details of the Global Housekeepers campaign and different initiatives that are taking place throughout the world. And there is now a campaign week every October where activities take place in coordination in major cities throughout the world highlighting these issues. We have some global hotel chains engaged in discussions in this. And again, Melia Hotels stands out. Melia have got a global trade union rights agreement with the IUF. And we've begun working on them on another important issue that I haven't touched on that impacts very greatly on housekeepers, which is sexual harassment, both from guests and colleagues and managers. So we're working with Melia Hotels to try and drop a global role model on dealing with sexual harassment. We already have one with Sodexo, which is a French contract catering company. At European level, with EFAT, which is the European version of the IUF, there is actually a social dialogue committee established with HOTREC, which is the European Employers Federation, where this type of issue is spoken about on a regular basis. And then, as I said, Global Housekeepers Week. We have a mixture of things happening. We have sometimes there are protests to highlight the bad practices, but there's also events to highlight the good practices. And a lot of work has been done in Argentina on how to deal with health and safety standards in housekeeping. And there's a lot of good practice up on the IUF website. In California, there is now an occupational health standard that's been written into their state legislation specifically aimed at housekeepers. And we're looking at how we can use that as a role model to adapt and try and campaign for that to apply in other countries. So I think that's about all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Really